The wedding cake was sinking. The bride was screaming. A crocodile had just snatched the ring bearer's wig clean off his head. And somewhere beneath the chaos, Karen was shrieking into her lavender megaphone while standing ankle-deep in my irrigation ditch. Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how we got here. Let's just say, if you're going to throw your daughter's luxury barn wedding on land you don't own, maybe double-check that it's not home to 160 legally protected crocodiles and the man who feeds them twice a day with a side of petty vengeance. Most folks retire to Florida because of the crocodiles. I retired with them. After 32 years wrangling everything from Burmese pythons to drunk alligators in porta potties for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I'd earned my quiet piece of earth. That piece just so happened to be 23 acres of tangled brush, lowland marsh, and a series of man-made aquatic enclosures originally constructed as part of a now-defunct federal conservation program. Long story short, when the agency got defunded, the government needed somewhere to rehome a whole mess of crocs, and nobody in D.C. wanted to pay for airfare to Arizona. I volunteered, got the permits, did the paperwork, built a fence so strong it could stop a charging rhino, let alone a curious toddler. I named them all, too. Some, ironically, Judge Judy, Gatorade, Karen. Some, historically, General Swampington, Clucksworth. Don't ask. There were 160 in total, all tagged, tracked, and safely secured behind 3 layers of legal and literal barriers. And for 4 years, everything was peaceful, until the real danger showed up in wedge heels and a visor. Her name was Karen Dolores Temple Wexler, but on the property map she had printed at the HOA office, she'd sharpied in Community Czar. She moved in 6 months ago, right on the edge of our 2 properties, where the HOA's neatly gridded parcels ended and my swamp began. I remember the first time I met her. I was waist-deep in algae, wearing my chest waders and holding a bucket of thawed chicken thighs, calling out for Cluck Norris. She approached the fence like she owned it, hands on hips, sunglasses the size of frying pans. "Excuse me," she hollered through the chain link. "I'm getting complaints about a smell." I blinked. "Ma'am, you're standing 20 feet from a crocodile urinal. What exactly were you expecting?" She didn't laugh. Just sniffed, made a note on her clipboard, and stalked off muttering something about civilized property lines. I should have known right then. That was the beginning. She showed up again the next week, this time with a tape measure. Apparently, the HOA had passed a new guideline that no body of standing water shall be within 50 feet of any residential structure unless approved for ornamental purposes. I pointed out 3 things. 1. My water wasn't standing. It was swarming. 2. My property wasn't in the HOA. And 3. The only thing ornamental about my ponds were the federally protected reptiles sunbathing like leathery retirees. She didn't care. She pulled out her phone and started taking pictures of my enclosures like she was auditioning for Dateline. I reminded her again that she had no jurisdiction, but that didn't stop her from sending courtesy notices for excess vegetation, unregistered fauna, and once, I swear on Clucksworth's skull, ambient swamp noise exceeding 65 decibels. I checked the letterhead. OA printed. No legal weight. But it was a warning. She was testing the water. That fall, I noticed the lot's stakes near the eastern edge of my land had been pulled up. Nothing big. No signs. Just the kind of quiet, sneaky little thing someone does when they think nobody's looking. I always am. I redrove the stakes with my own survey markers and added a sign that read, "Private property, no trespassing." Also, crocodiles. The next morning, I found a yoga mat strung between 2 cypress stumps and a pamphlet for something called Zen by the Marsh, a community wellness pilot. Karen's latest crusade. I left the mat there, along with a fresh pile of croc droppings. The yoga stopped, but the campaign didn't. She began petitioning to rezone the marshland on my border, citing underutilized green space and claiming it was an eyesore inconsistent with community aesthetics. She held HOA meetings on her back patio with a megaphone, loudly declaring her intention to beautify the borderlands. When she wasn't lobbying for a walking trail through my thistle patch, she was out there photographing my drainage ditches like they were national security threats. I tried to be neighborly. Invited her to coffee once. She brought a complaint form. Sent her an email with my permit documentation. She replied with a YouTube link about backyard wildlife management. Even offered a tour, explaining how the enclosures worked and the fact that the land was federally protected, complete with its own conservation easement. Her response? We'll see what the county says. She didn't believe in boundaries. Not physical ones, not legal ones, and certainly not ethical ones. She started referring to my property as the North Zone, like she was playing Risk. It would have been funny if it wasn't so damn invasive. Things escalated when she installed a temporary fence 5 feet onto my land and claimed it was to delineate the event area. I tore it down. She called the sheriff. Sheriff showed up, took one look at the signs, the permits, and the 20-foot gator sunning itself beside the water pump, and politely suggested Karen go home before she got herself bitten. She told the sheriff I was weaponizing wildlife. He laughed. I didn't, because I knew Karen wasn't going to stop with fences and noise complaints. She was the type who thought persistence could replace permission, and when someone like that sets her sights on land she doesn't own, she'll try everything short of moving her couch into your shed. That's when the letters started, certified ones, from the Community Beautification Committee, which I later discovered was just Karen, her cousin Brenda, and a chihuahua in a vest. They claimed my habitat was a public nuisance, and that exotic animal storage violated local residential codes. I faxed them back a copy of the federal wildlife registration forms, including the Department of the Interior seal, which I highlighted in red. No response. 2 weeks later, a landscaping crew showed up on behalf of the HOA and tried to mow down a 300-square-foot cattail bog. I stopped them halfway through, explained again that the marsh was protected. They left. Karen called me a wetlands squatter at the next board meeting. I might have let it slide, I really might have. But then she started canvassing the neighborhood, claiming the crocs were unstable, that the enclosures were improvised, and that I was harboring illegally trafficked reptiles. Word got around. I lost a few egg customers. Someone left a note in my mailbox that said, "We don't want Jurassic Park." I laughed, but the laughter had started to sound more like teeth grinding, because this wasn't about crocodiles anymore. It was about power, control, and a woman who thought she could gaslight an entire neighborhood into thinking my land was hers to command. She even posted in the HOA newsletter that the marsh had untapped potential for future family-friendly gatherings. The phrase potential venue was used more than once. I decided it was time to reintroduce myself, not as the quiet old swamp guy, but as what I really was. A fully licensed, still federally recognized wildlife officer with a paper trail longer than her HOA bylaws and a legal deed sealed under notary so hard it could survive nuclear winter. I hired a drone crew to take aerial footage of the property lines, complete with GPS overlays. I printed 40 copies of my conservation easement, my FWS permits, and a notarized affidavit confirming that the marshland was considered critical habitat for 4 protected species, including 2 of the crocs. I delivered them in person, each folder sealed with red wax and stamped "Restricted." Karen refused to open hers, said it was intimidation. I called it documentation. That night, she sent out an emergency newsletter titled Toxic Marsh Update. She claimed the neighborhood was at risk due to reptilian overflow. I don't even know what that means. But the next morning, I found tire tracks on my lower field, right where the event lawn was supposedly going to be. That's when I knew she wasn't backing off. In fact, she was just getting started. The only thing left was for her to make the one mistake she couldn't walk back from. And bless her lavender-scented soul, she made it. With flowers, with rented folding chairs, and with an RSVP list 200 guests deep. But that part, that's still coming. It started, as most land thefts do, with a clipboard and a lie. A Tuesday morning, hot as sin and twice as humid, I saw her marching across the southern slope like she owned it, visor angled like a general's cap, clipboard bouncing on her hip, and that smug, purposeful gait of a woman 2 meetings away from a coup. Karen had graduated from HOA newsletters and megaphone rants to something far worse, land annexation. That morning, I found a laminated sign planted in the muddy patch just past the cattails, about 30 feet into my property. It read, "Future Willow Commons, reserved for community events." Below it, in smaller print, was the phrase, "pending landscape remediation." I stood there, coffee in one hand, dog-eared federal easement map in the other, and just stared. She'd actually done it. She was trying to manifest an HOA park through sheer willpower and yard signs. The kicker? She put a fake logo on it, some stock image of a tree with 4 leaves shaped like hearts, like that would soften the fact that she was now trespassing on a crocodile nursery. I thought maybe it was a prank, some misguided neighborhood art project. But then, 2 days later, I watched a survey crew roll up in an unmarked pickup and start hammering stakes into the soft earth. I asked them politely what they thought they were doing. The older guy with the clipboard looked confused and told me they were instructed by the HOA board to map a proposed public parcel at the southeast border. I laughed, out loud. Told them they were 42 feet into federal habitat with 0 legal authority and about 2 seconds away from violating 4 separate wildlife ordinances. The guy looked real uncomfortable and made a few phone calls. 5 minutes later, Karen showed up, hair curled, earrings jangling, and with a printed map so covered in highlighter that it looked like a preschool coloring project. "This is a commons area," she announced before I could speak. "Per HOA vote 6.3, 2A. I asked her when this vote took place. She said last week. I asked who voted. She said a quorum of eligible members. I asked for a roster. She said, and I quote, 'You're not part of the community.' I told her that was kind of the point." See, here's what really happened. Karen orchestrated a vote by mailing out a ballot postcard to all HOA residents with pre-filled boxes already checked in favor of the land grab. She told them it was an expansion proposal to create more shared space for gatherings and children's recreation. Most folks didn't respond, but she counted silence as consent. Then she forged a couple dozen proxy signatures from elderly residents she claimed couldn't attend in person, and boom, the vote passed. The Commons was born. Out of thin air and stolen ink. When I confronted her again about the legality of it all, she handed me a packet, 30 pages of faux legal jargon and clip art graphics, with a cover letter that said, "We appreciate your cooperation in this exciting new chapter of neighborhood togetherness." That same night, she posted a celebratory photo on Nextdoor of herself holding a bottle of sparkling cider on what she claimed was the future heart of the Willow Creek lifestyle. I didn't respond, not publicly. Instead, I went quiet. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling everything. Drone footage, old plat maps, time-stamped trail cam images showing Karen walking her rat dog across my property, and even satellite overlays showing the long-standing boundary lines from when the marshland was first surveyed back in 1981. I called my conservation contact at the Department of the Interior and flagged the activity. He told me to document, but not to escalate. Said if it reached a certain threshold, it could qualify for federal enforcement under the Endangered Habitat Interference Clause. I asked what that threshold was. He said, mass disturbance of nesting habitat. I made a note. And then, just when I thought she couldn't get more delusional, came the wedding announcement. It was a glossy trifold brochure, stuffed in everyone's mailboxes by a perky teenager in a boatie and skateboard helmet. The wedding of the season, it read in looping pink script. Savannah Chase, a Willow Creek love story. I wouldn't have thought much of it if I hadn't flipped to the back panel and seen the map. And there it was, ceremony site, Willow Commons event lawn, right over the Crocodile Nest Trench, right over it. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean the altar was marked exactly 12 feet from Cluck Norris's den. I could have thrown a brick from my hammock and hit the reserved seating section. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just grabbing land. She was using it. The wedding was in 3 weeks. Full-blown Pinterest nightmare. Tents, generators, seating for 200, catered buffet, live quartet, open bar, and, according to the brochure, a swan release at sunset. I just about choked on my lemonade. I reread the whole thing twice to be sure. Nowhere did it mention that the land wasn't hers, or that it wasn't zoned for events, or that the Willow Commons was in fact the southern flood basin of a federally protected crocodile enclosure currently in active nesting season. Nesting season. Which meant hormones, territoriality, and a 99% chance of carnage if anyone in pastel touched the wrong patch of reeds. And she was putting her daughter in heels right on top of it. I called the county zoning office, asked if any permits had been filed. The woman laughed. On a habitat parcel. Are you kidding? That'd be a felony. I asked about noise permits, sanitation, alcohol licensing. Nothing. Not a trace. Karen had decided this was happening and figured the world would move around her. She was wrong, and I was going to let her find that out the hard way. I didn't tell anyone. Not even the sheriff. Not yet. I figured the best thing I could do, the most satisfying, legally airtight thing I could do, was let the trespass happen in full view. Let her walk all 200 of those boatied guests into a biological minefield, and then sit back, sip my tea, and hand the federal boys a folder so thick it could stop a bullet. So I watched, waited, took photos. The tents went up 2 days early, white canopies staked deep into protected soil. They even ran temporary power from Karen's house using extension cords, which was a code violation all on its own. The dance floor was set up 10 feet from the croc nesting berm. The bar trailer was parked directly over a turtle burrow. I could see it all from my back porch, a slow-motion train wreck of pastel madness and high-heeled hubris. On the morning of the wedding, they brought in a drone team, to capture aerial romance footage. One of those things dipped within 6 feet of the main pond and spooked half the nesters into the shade canopy. That's when I knew. Knew it wasn't just going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be federal, biblical. The kind of enforcement they write training manuals about. I made myself a sandwich, got my camera, and waited. Because what Karen didn't know, what she refused to know, was that she hadn't just lied to her neighbors or overstepped a few property lines. She'd declared war. And the marsh was about to fight back. I woke up early that morning. Not because I was anxious, I'd slept like a baby on tranquilizers, but because I knew I was about to witness something rare and beautiful, karmic justice in linen suits and overpriced heels. I made my coffee strong, black, and triple filtered. I packed a small cooler with ice water, a pair of binoculars, 3 pens, my field notepad, and a government-issue pamphlet titled Federal Wildlife Violations and You. Then I hauled my aluminum lawn chair up the slope to the edge of the property line, the real line, not the one Karen had sharpied onto her HOA map. I'd marked it with bright pink surveyor's tape, just in case any photographers tried to drag their tripods across. I had full sun, clear sight lines, and the tactical patience of a man who'd once waited 8 hours for a poacher to step out of a porta-john in Louisiana bayou. This was going to be better. The wedding crew was already buzzing by 9 a.m. An army of interns in matching black polos moved like ants across the field, dragging wires, setting tables, adjusting massive floral arrangements made of imported peonies and dyed pampas grass. One of the groomsmen almost fell face first into the bog, trying to take a phone call near the catering van. I noted it in my journal. At 10:37 a.m., a drone took off from the corner of the staging area and dipped low over the marshland to film the bridal arch. The arch, oh, that glorious, misguided monstrosity, had been erected directly over an active crocodile tunnel, and not just any tunnel. That one belonged to Cluck Norris and his mate Maureen, both of whom had been nesting there for the past 2 weeks. I could still remember the moment I'd found her eggs tucked under the mud bank like white grenades. Protective didn't begin to cover it. Maureen had once chased off a fox, a raccoon, and a UPS truck in the same day. By noon, the guests began arriving. BMWs, Teslas, rental limos with monogrammed signs that said Savannah, Chase, eternally yours. There were at least 24 women in stilettos stabbing at the dirt like it had insulted them. Men in suspenders tried not to sweat through their linen while waiting for the bar to open. Karen greeted each person personally with that taut, plastered smile that said everything was perfect, even though the generator had already shorted once and the florist was having a breakdown behind the chafing dishes. I sipped my coffee and took notes. At 1:45 p.m., the band kicked in. A string quartet, obviously, because nothing says wilderness elegance like a cello solo in 92-degree heat. The sound system crackled, thumped, and sent low-frequency vibrations through the marsh that, to the untrained eye, meant little. But I saw it. The moment, the ripple, like a sixth sense. A faint tremble underfoot. The marsh went still, bird calls stopped, frogs silenced, and then the movement started. First, a rustle of cattails, then the splash of displaced water. Then, God help them, the hissing. At exactly 1:53 p.m., Maureen emerged from the undergrowth like a prehistoric tank, tail dragging, jaw agape, and eyes locked on the floral arch where 3 bridesmaids were posing with champagne flutes. I don't think they saw her at first. She blended well with the mud, especially when wet. But Cluck Norris was right behind her, and Cluck doesn't blend. Cluck's a 12-foot, 800-pound freight train with a bad attitude and a tracking tag from the Peruvian Rainforest Biodiversity Project. He's also protected under 2 international treaties. When Cluck surfaced and let out a low, guttural growl, the kind that rattles your sternum from 50 feet, that's when the flower girls screamed. What followed was pure, uncut chaos. The cellist screamed and bolted into the brush, knocking over a speaker stand. The best man tripped over the champagne ice bucket trying to climb onto the band platform. One of the flower girls fell into a shallow trench and lost both shoes and her dignity. Guests scattered like pigeons on an airport runway. Karen, bless her beige soul, stood frozen near the generator, screaming into a walkie-talkie that wasn't even turned on. "Get the HOA attorney! Where's the attorney?" There was no attorney. I knew it, she knew it. The guests would soon know it too, because the only legal presence on that field was me, my notebook, and a laminated badge that hadn't expired yet. I dialed my wildlife contact with the Fish and Wildlife Service and said, simply, "It's happening. They're nesting." "We've got civilians on a federally protected zone and an endangered specimen on camera." His response, "We're in the air." I hung up and turned on my radio scanner. By 2, 12 p.m., the first crocodile had made contact with the buffet. Some unfortunate soul, likely an underpaid cater waiter, had left the lid open on the pulled pork station. Karen's niece tried to shoo it away with a paper fan. The crocodile did not take kindly to paper fans. The live stream was already rolling. I know this because several guests were screaming on TikTok while sprinting away from the porta potties, and hashtags like Swamp Wedding and Gatorgate were beginning to trend. At 2:25 p.m., I made the second call, not to wildlife enforcement, to Homeland Security. Because Cluck Norris, bless his cold-blooded heart, was one of the international specimens placed under joint stewardship with a biodiversity program that, due to its funding structure, fell under the Department of Homeland Security's Environmental Integrity Clause. It was a long shot, but I'd seen it happen before. You poke the right bureaucratic bear, and it sends in the hawks. At 2:41 p.m., I heard the choppers. They came low and fast, 2 blacked-out helicopters with no markings, just the dull chop of rotors slicing through a sky now filled with panicked doves and flying party napkins. The sound sent the crocodiles back into a frenzy, half of them charging, the rest receding into their tunnels. One helicopter circled the perimeter while the other hovered directly over the wedding site, blowing over folding chairs, buffet trays, and at least one bridal bouquet. Karen's hair was stuck in her lip gloss, her face contorted in disbelief as 2 DHS agents in tactical khakis descended on ropes and asked, very politely, who was in charge of the unpermitted wildlife disturbance. I watched from my lawn chair, took notes, binoculars trained on the meltdown. Guests were herded away from the enclosures, some crying, others filming. One father of the bride type tried to argue with the officers and was promptly escorted toward the boundary line by a third agent who looked like he bench-pressed laws for a living. Savannah, the bride, was nowhere to be seen. Last I spotted her, she was running barefoot across the pasture, veil in hand, screaming something about refunds and botulism. I later learned she'd tripped over a gator egg and ended up in the back of a catering van with 2 terrified teenage servers. Karen, for her part, tried to explain that the land was officially designated as a community gathering site. The officer asked for documentation. She handed them a folded HOA newsletter. He looked at it, looked at her, and then radioed something I couldn't hear. 5 minutes later, they began cordoning off the entire area with hazard tape. DHS flagged the marsh as a federal investigation site. Wildlife agents arrived in full gear with transport crates, tagging equipment, and more laminated badges than a Vegas convention. By 3:10 p.m., the wedding was officially canceled. By 3:12 p.m., the live stream had been viewed over 400 times. Local news choppers had arrived. The HOA website crashed, and someone, possibly Karen's nephew, had already uploaded the footage to YouTube under the title HOA Wedding Ruined by Swamp Monsters, Real Footage. I watched it all unfold from my chair, calm, cool, steady-handed. Like the marsh around me, I didn't need to chase chaos. I just waited for it to step into my den. Because when you build your empire on someone else's land, and you lie to everyone around you just to throw a party that makes you feel powerful, sometimes nature sends a crocodile to RSVP, and sometimes he brings friends. They say justice is blind, but in this case it had binoculars, drone footage, and a crocodile named Cluck Norris as Exhibit A. The morning after the wedding, or what was left of it, I was awoken not by alarm or birdsong, but by the steady thud of reporters' boots on wet grass and the low drone of federal SUV engines creeping into Willow Creek. The marsh was swarming with investigators, and so was Karen's front lawn. DHS agents, Fish and Wildlife officials, a representative from the Department of Environmental Conservation, and, to my absolute delight, a state auditor with a clipboard so thick it could have been used as riot gear. Karen's visor was gone, replaced by a sun hat that sagged with defeat. Her pastel blouse was wrinkled, and the shoulder pads hung like wilted epaulets on a disgraced general. And the cherry on top? Her daughter, Savannah, once the blushing bride-to-be, was standing on the curb with 2 suitcases, loudly explaining to a rideshare driver that she was never speaking to her mother again. Apparently, nobody had told her the venue was a swamp, or that the Commons wasn't communal, or that her big day would end with DHS helicopters, and her fiancé locked in a porta-potty hyperventilating over Cluck Norris's jawprint in the side panel. The charges came fast and loud. Illegal encroachment, destruction of a federally protected habitat, endangering a Category 2 species under international agreement, unauthorized use of public utility lines, false representation of zoning authority, and my personal favorite, obstruction of environmental enforcement. That one came courtesy of Karen's shrieking into the walkie-talkie as the agents descended from helicopters. You can't claim ignorance when half the neighborhood has videos of you yelling, "Move the floral arch closer to the pond," while stepping over clearly posted, "Do not enter nesting zone" signs. The investigators brought in soil core samples, pulled GPS timestamps from the drone flight logs, and matched every stake, tent, and power cable to satellite overlays I had already submitted. 3 days before the wedding, because I didn't just wait for her to trip over herself, I laid out the rope, neatly, with fluorescent markers, and filed everything through certified mail. Turns out, Karen had also misused HOA funds to prep the fake commons area, hiring a landscaping company owned by her cousin's second husband to clear brush and level the marsh. That violated not just zoning laws, but state anti-nepotism statutes. The forensic accountants had a field day. Once word got out that Karen had been siphoning HOA dues into side projects, the residents of Willow Creek, most of whom had spent the last year dodging garbage fees and begging for broken lamp repairs, collectively snapped. By the end of the week, the HOA board was served with the beginnings of a class action lawsuit alleging fraud, misappropriation of funds, and illegal assessment increases. The law firm handling the suit cited a widespread campaign of deliberate misinformation, unpermitted land grabs, and dangerous environmental negligence. One neighbor found out his backyard deck had been partially built on the original conservation line, and he'd been paying fines for unauthorized improvements that weren't even on his land. Another neighbor, the sweet lady with the 4 rescue cats and the home-baked zucchini muffins, broke down in tears when she realized Karen had used HOA funds to buy monogrammed tablecloths for the wedding reception. Monogrammed, with Savannah's initials, in rose gold thread. The entire neighborhood turned on her faster than a mosquito trap in a thunderstorm. Lawn signs that once read "Proud Member of Willow Creek O" were replaced overnight with Sharpied cardboard that said, "Not in my backyard," literally. The Nextdoor app was a war zone. Karen tried to issue a formal clarification through the HOA website, but it crashed under the weight of comments, and someone, not me, but someone beautiful and petty, rerouted the site to a YouTube video titled "Swamp Karen, a Wedding Gone Wild." Within 48 hours, it had 2.3 million views. Meanwhile, I released everything. I'm talking drone footage, mail receipts, certified warning letters, timestamped security cam recordings of Karen's unauthorized surveying crews, even screenshots of her newsletter where she referred to my land as underdeveloped marshland ripe for HOA cultivation. I posted it all to a shared Google Drive titled Swampgate. Receipts, regret, I sent the link to every HOA member, every journalist on the scene, and every county official who'd ever given me a parking ticket. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about legacy. About never letting another clipboard tyrant rewrite the rules just because they didn't like the smell of mud and reptile breath. By the end of the month, Karen had resigned from the HOA in disgrace, citing personal threats and a toxic environment. She moved out 2 weeks later. Her house sold at a loss to a retired biologist who promised to respect the marsh. The rest of the board resigned shortly after, under threat of being individually named in the lawsuit. That left the community in a bit of a vacuum. No leadership, no structure, no Karen telling people what shade of beige their mailboxes should be. So when the dust settled, and people started wondering what came next, I made a suggestion. Why not protect the land instead of fighting it? The newly formed interim neighborhood council agreed, and, by a near-unanimous vote, except one abstention from a man who claimed the Crocs made his poodle anxious, we dissolved the HOA. In its place, we formed the Willow Creek Conservation Easement Committee. Our mission? Preserve the marsh, educate the residents, respect the habitat. And maybe prevent future weddings from turning into federally televised catastrophes. Guess who they asked to chair it? Yours truly. We even got a local artist to paint a mural on the side of the former HOA clubhouse. It's a beautiful thing, 16 feet wide and covered in vibrant marsh colors, cattails waving, water shimmering, and right in the center, a majestic crocodile mid-leap, jaws wide, snapping at a wedding cake topper shaped like a bride. The title etched beneath it, Justice with Scales. I couldn't have written it better myself. The area once known as Willow Commons has since been restored to its natural state. No more folding chairs, no more tents. Just marsh grass, dragonflies, and the occasional grumble from Cluck Norris as he patrols his territory with renewed pride. The warning signs are still up, more official now, with the seal of the Department of the Interior, but I added one more, right at the edge where the tent stakes used to be. It's carved into solid cypress, lacquered to withstand the rain, and edged in bronze letters that glint when the sun hits just right. It reads, Private property. Protected by crocodiles, lawyers, and God. And every time I walk past it, coffee in hand, cluck at my heels, I smile. Not because I won, not because Karen lost, but because the marsh is quiet again. And peace, like reptiles, thrives best when left undisturbed.